It was always the silence of space that people found unsettling. But those at the private space agency, Meridian Deep Space, knew the truth. The silence was a comfort. The real unease began when something from that infinite void decided to speak. The probe Odysseus 7 was a marvel of automated engineering, a lone sentinel sent to graze the dark pastures of Jupiter's outer moons. Its target was Ananke, a tiny retrograde rock trapped in the planet's grip. The probe wasn't expected to find life. It was looking for ice, for minerals. Instead, it found the pattern. The first and only high-resolution image transmitted from Ananke's surface showed no craters, no dust fields. It showed only it, a vast, intricate geological structure that sprawled across the moon's northern pole. It was a fractal, but impossibly complex, a web of crystalline fissures that seemed to fold in on themselves, drawing the eye deeper. Back on Earth, in the hushed control room, Dr. Kenji Tanaka was the first to see it. He leaned in, his mind trained to find order in chaos, suddenly finding too much order. The image was beautiful. It was perfect. And as the hours passed, Kenji found he could not look away. He didn't know it yet, but the signal had been received. The infection had begun. For the first 6 hours, Dr. Kenji Tanaka experienced what he could only describe as professional bliss. The image from Ananke was more than a discovery. It was a revelation. His mind, accustomed to the sparse, chaotic data of the cosmos, the predictable scatter of radiation, the cold math of orbits, was suddenly presented with the opposite. It was a structure so dense with information, so breathtakingly deliberate, that it felt less like geology and more like an artifact. He worked in a state of flow, his fingers flying across interfaces, isolating segments, enhancing resolutions, running spectroscopic analyses. The material was a crystalline silicate, mundane, but the form it took was not. It repeated, but never perfectly. It spiraled, but followed a geometry that seemed to defy Euclidean space. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Alone in the low light of the analytics lab, Director Nia Sharma found him there when she arrived for her morning brief. Kenji hadn't moved from his chair. His screen was filled with the fractal, a mesmerizing web of faint icy blues and deep shadowy purples. "Kenji, you've been here all night," Nia said, her voice practical, though she couldn't hide the excitement. "What have you found? Is it a message?" Kenji turned slowly, his eyes wide, unfocused. "A message," he seemed to taste the word. "No, not a message. A message is an attempt to be understood." He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. This simply is. It's the answer. We just never knew the question," Nia frowned. This was not the precise language of her chief astronomer. "Kenji, that's poetic, but I need data." "Is it artificial?" "It is necessary," he replied. He turned back to the screen, his attention captured completely. "It has to be continued." Nia left him, attributing his strange demeanor to exhaustion and the adrenaline of discovery. She spent the day in budget meetings, the thrill of the image muted by the realities of funding. By the time she returned that evening, the atmosphere in the lab had changed. It was silent. 2 other analysts who had been assigned to verify Kenji's work were sitting at their stations, but they weren't analyzing. They were sketching. One was using a stylus on a tablet, the other a simple ballpoint pen on a legal pad, her hand moving in swift, certain loops. Nia felt a cold spike in her stomach. "Sarah, what are you doing?" The analyst Sarah didn't look up. I'm clarifying the structure. It helps to trace it, to feel the flow." Nia looked for Kenji. He wasn't at his desk. She found him in the main briefing room. The lights were off, save for the twin projectors casting the pattern of Ananke across the room's massive central whiteboard. Kenji stood before it, shirtless, his back to her. He was holding a black dry erase marker. The entire whiteboard, from ceiling to floor, was covered in the pattern. He had copied it line for line in meticulous detail. But he had run out of space. "Kenji," Nia said, her voice sharp. He didn't turn. He was studying the bottom right corner of the board, where the pattern was clearly incomplete. He looked at the marker in his hand, then at the empty white wall beside the board. He took a step and, with a steady hand, began to draw the line directly onto the painted drywall. "Kenji, stop. That's facility property." It was a ridiculous thing to say, but it was all her managerial mind could grasp. He finally turned. His eyes were serene, joyful. It doesn't want to be on the screen, Nia. It's too small. It needs room. What needs room, Kenji? The image. The word, he whispered. He looked down at his own chest, bare and pale in the projector light. He seemed to see it as just more empty space. Frustratingly blank. It has to be finished. I'm the only one who sees the whole thing. He lifted a blue ink pen from the conference table. Before Nia could move, before she could even process the intent, he placed the nib against his left forearm. It was not an act of harm. It was an act of continuation. He began to draw, his hand moving with the same fluid precision he'd used on the whiteboard. The intricate spiraling lines of the Ananke fractal flowed from the pen, staining his skin. He didn't wince. He sighed, a sound of profound relief, as if an agonizing itch had finally been scratched. I see it now, he breathed, watching the blue ink bifurcate, creating a perfect tiny spiral just below his elbow. It's a language, and I'm the first one who gets to speak it. Nia Sharma backed out of the room. She sealed the door and hit the magnetic lock. Her scientific curiosity had vanished, replaced by a primal, administrative terror. It wasn't a discovery. It was a containment breach. Not of a chemical or a microbe, but of an idea. And it was already in the minds of her three best people. The click of the magnetic lock on the briefing room was the loudest sound Nia Sharma had ever heard. It was an act of finality that solved nothing. Kenji was contained, but the image he had seen was not. It had been broadcast. It had been studied. She ran from the briefing room, her mind racing, ticking off a list of everyone who had access to the primary Odysseus 7 data feed. Kenji, the two analysts, Sarah and Mark, the systems technician. 4 people. She burst into the main analytics lab. The room was bathed in the cool blue light of monitors. The systems technician was gone. His shift had ended hours ago, but Sarah and Mark were still there, just as she had left them. Sarah was no longer on her legal pad. She had found a box of sticky notes and was meticulously drawing one small, perfect fractal segment on each. She would finish one, paste it to the edge of her monitor, and begin the next, arranging them in a slowly growing spiral. Her desk looked like a shrine. Mark, meanwhile, was staring blankly at a diagnostic screen. But his right hand, the one on his mouse, was moving. It was tracing the pattern again and again and again. The optical sensor of the mouse dragging the cursor across the screen in the same looping, intricate path. It was a phantom gesture, the physical echo of a thought stuck on repeat. Nia didn't raise her voice. She walked to the wall-mounted emergency panel. This wasn't a fire. This wasn't a chemical spill. It was something new. She bypassed the standard alarms and triggered Protocol E Cognito, a quarantine procedure so theoretical it had never been used. It was designed to contain a hostile informational agent. A heavy bulkhead door slid shut at the far end of the lab, sealing the wing. The main ventilation shifted to a closed-loop system, a pointless precaution that made Nia feel slightly less helpless. Then, on her personal workstation, she executed the master command. Every monitor in the lab, save for her own, went black. The effect was instantaneous. Sarah's hand, poised over a new sticky note, froze. Mark's mouse stopped moving. Both analysts looked up, their eyes blinking, adjusting to the sudden darkness. They looked confused, like people waking from a deep sleep. Sarah, Mark, Nia said, her voice amplified by the room's intercom. Director? Sarah said, her voice small. I don't know what. I was just clarifying the data set. She looked down at the dozens of notes stuck to her monitor, her face pale with a dawning horror. Stay where you are, Nia commanded. We have a cognitive contaminant. This wing is under full quarantine. A medical team is on its way, she lied. No medical team was coming. What could they do? Her next stop was the server room. It was a cold, loud place, the antithesis of the silent moon Ananke. The Odysseus 7 data lived here in Stack 7B. Nia did not delete the data. It was too valuable. Instead, she performed a physical extraction. She put on insulated gloves, unlocked the server chassis, and manually pulled the blades, yanking the physical hard drives that contained the image. She severed them from the network. The pattern was now offline. It was air-gapped. It was, by all technical definitions, contained. She brought the heavy drives back to her office. which adjoined the analytics lab. A thick reinforced window, designed for observation during secure experiments, separated her from her team. This was the glass wall. She sat in her chair, the server blades humming softly on her desk safe. On the other side of the glass, she watched Sarah and Mark. They were talking to each other, panicked. But then, as the minutes stretched into an hour, the panic subsided. The need returned. Sarah, with no paper, picked up her empty ceramic coffee mug. With her fingernails, she began to scratch the pattern into the glaze. Mark had turned his chair to face the black reflective surface of his monitor. Using the oil from his own skin, he was finger-painting the fractal onto the dark screen. Nia Sharma stared at the humming hard drives on her desk, the caged image. And then she looked through the glass at her two employees, their minds and bodies now instruments of the pattern's replication. She had built a prison for the information. But she had done it too late. The information was already free. It had found hosts, and she was standing on the outside of the glass, looking in at the first two prisoners of a war she didn't even know how to fight. For 24 hours, Director Nia Sharma lived by the rhythm of the glass wall. Her office, once a command center, was now a containment viewport. Inside the sealed lab, the situation had deteriorated into a kind of quiet, communal madness. Dr. Kenji Tanaka was the epicenter. He had found a case of medical ink pens in a first aid kit and was meticulously, almost lovingly, completing the pattern on his own body. He was a walking manuscript, every inch of his visible skin a testament to the Ananke fractal. Sarah and Mark were his acolytes. They had torn down ceiling tiles, desperate for the fresh white canvas of the fiberboard beneath. They were no longer just drawing. They were building. They collected office chairs, staplers, and computer monitors, arranging them in the center of the room, attempting to construct a three-dimensional representation of the pattern. They were creating a temple. Nia was alone, cut off by her own quarantine. She was watching her brightest minds build an altar to an alien signal, and she was powerless. The quiet swoosh of her office door sliding open nearly made her scream. It was Elias, pushing his rattling cart. He was the facility's eldest janitor, a man who moved with a slow, deliberate pace, seemingly immune to the frantic energy of the scientists around him. He had worked at this observatory in one form or another for 40 years. Director? He nodded, his voice a gravelly monotone. Floors are done. Get out, Elias. Nia snapped, her voice cracking with exhaustion. This entire wing is under full contamination lockdown. How did you even get through the security corridor? Elias held up a heavy old-fashioned brass key. Master key. Been using it since before these fancy card readers. He shuffled past her, seemingly unconcerned by her panic, and pointed his squeegee at the massive glass partition. It's Tuesday, glass day, and your side, he tapped it, is a mess, full of handprints. Nia was too stunned to stop him. She watched, dumbfounded, as the old man sprayed a mist of blue-tinted cleaning solution onto the glass, the only thing separating her from the cognitive infection. Elias began his work, his squeegee moving in long, practiced strokes. On the other side of the glass, not 5 feet away, Kenji Tanaka paused his work. He pressed his face to the partition, his eyes wide and ecstatic, staring directly at Elias. Kenji traced the pattern on his side of the glass. Elias simply wiped the trace away from his side. He paused, squinting at the scene inside. He looked at Kenji, covered in ink. He looked at Sarah, who was chanting softly as she balanced a keyboard on a stack of binders. He looked at the vast, complex pattern that Kenji had projected onto the main wall. Humph, Elias grunted. What? Tia asked, her voice barely a whisper. They're making a real mess in there, Director, Elias said, not turning. And that picture on the wall? It's just ugly. Nia felt the air leave her lungs. It was as if she'd been underwater and had finally broken the surface. Ugly? Yeah, all those squiggles, it's just a knot. A big tangled knot. Hard to look at, really. Gives me a headache. He turned to her, his own eyes a pale, faded blue. No offense, ma'am. I know you all like your science, but that thing, it's got no pop. Nia stood up slowly. Elias, you're looking right at it. You've been looking at it for a full minute. How do you feel? Elias shrugged. Like I need to get this glass done before my shift ends. A desperate, impossible idea sparked in Nia's mind. Elias, what's your favorite color? He gave her a strange look. Color? Ma'am, I don't have one. I've got that thing. The achromatopsia. He stumbled over the complex word. The doctor said my eyes don't see colors. Never have. Everything's just gray, like an old television. Achromatopsia. Total colorblindness. Nia's scientific mind, the part of her that hadn't been consumed by fear, suddenly made the connection. The image from Ananke, the icy blues and deep shadowy purples Kenji had first obsessed over, the different colored pens he was using on his skin. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a layered signal. The information wasn't just in the lines. It was encoded in the hues. It was a multi-channel transmission. And the key to understanding it, to receiving it, was the ability to distinguish the layers of color. Elias, who saw the world in monochrome, saw only the top layer, a meaningless, complicated drawing. The signal could not find purchase. The virus had no vector. Nia looked at the old janitor, this man who had just stared down a cosmic horror with the indifference of a man looking at a smudge. Elias, she said, her voice trembling, not with fear but with a sudden terrifying hope. How would you feel about earning some overtime? The plan was crude, born of desperation and duct tape. Nia found a spare security team earpiece and a small lapel microphone, pinning the mic to the collar of Elias's gray work shirt. She was turning a janitor into an astronaut, sending him into an alien environment that existed just 3 inches away, on the other side of the glass. You don't have to do this, Elias, she said, her voice tight. She was securing the transmitter pack to his belt next to a spray bottle of glass cleaner. It's fine, Director, Elias said, his voice impassive. He adjusted the earpiece. It's just talking. And they're still your people, aren't they? They just seem confused. He tapped his cart. Besides, that floor in there can't wait another day. Nia managed a weak smile. Just talk to him, Elias. Talk to Dr. Tanaka. Ask him what he's building. Just describe what you see. Don't look at the pattern on the walls. Look at him. Understood, ma'am. Look at the person, not the mess. Elias swiped his master key. The heavy quarantine bulkhead hissed open, a pneumatic sigh of defeat. The air that rolled out of the lab was still and warm, heavy with the scent of marker ink and human sweat. Elias pushed his rattling cart over the threshold and the door sealed shut behind him. On her side of the glass, Nia switched on the monitor. The audio feed crackled to life. Elias, can you hear me? Clear as a bell, Director. His voice came back, accompanied by the squeak of his cart's wheels. Nia watched through the glass, her heart hammering. Elias was a figure in monochrome, moving through a world of terrible color. He ignored Sarah and Mark, who were now sitting cross-legged on the floor, weaving intricate patterns from Ethernet cables, their faces serene. He pushed his cart directly to the center of the room, stopping just short of the main structure. Kenji Tanaka stood in the middle of it. He had arranged the desks, monitors, and chairs into a large, spiraling sculpture. It was a 3D representation of the Ananke fractal. It was chaotic, yet it possessed the same unsettling geometry as the image. Kenji was standing on a chair, carefully balancing a wireless mouse at the structure's highest point. He was completely absorbed, his body a canvas of blue and black ink. Dr. Tanaka, Elias said. Kenji froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide, no longer just joyful, but fiercely possessive. He looked at Elias, at his cart, at his uniform. He saw an interruption, an irrelevance. You should not be here, Kenji whispered. His voice was hoarse. This is a clean place. You are disorderly. Sorry about that, son, Elias said, pulling a trash bag from his cart. But this place is anything but clean. You've made a real disaster of things. Through the earpiece, Nia said, ask him what it is, the sculpture. The director wants to know what you're making there, Elias said, gesturing with a bundled-up trash bag. Looks complicated. Kenji's expression softened. He looked from Elias to his creation, and a radiant smile spread across his ink-stained face. He stepped down from the chair. It's not made, Kenji said, caressing a monitor he had balanced on two keyboards. "It's transcribed. I am just the vessel. I am translating the language." He pointed to the walls covered in the 2D pattern. "That is the text, the word, but it isn't flat. The image we received was just a shadow. This is the object. This is the truth of the form." He walked up to Elias, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Nia flinch, even from behind the glass. Elias, however, merely stood his ground. "Don't you see it?" Kenji pleaded, grabbing Elias's arm. Elias looked down at the hand gripping his sleeve, a hand covered in perfect spiraling fractals. "See what?" Elias asked. The language of creation. "It's all right here." Kenji pointed to the different colored lines on his own skin. "The blue is the path, the purple is the depth, the black is the foundation. It's all connected. It's the final word." Kenji was vibrating with the need to be understood. He grabbed a blue marker and held it up to Elias's face. "You see the blue, don't you? You see how it sings against the purple?" Elias squinted. He looked at the marker. He looked at Kenji's arm. He looked at the wall. "Son," Elias said, his voice flat. "That's not blue, it's just gray, same as the other one. Just a little darker." Nia's breath caught in her throat. Kenji's smile faltered. He stared at Elias, his head cocked. What did you say?" I said. "It's gray," Elias repeated, pulling his arm free. "They're all gray, the whole room, just gray. And this thing you built, it's just a pile of junk." The words hung in the sterile air. "It's just gray." For Dr. Kenji Tanaka, this statement was not an observation. It was an impossibility. It was like telling a mathematician that 2 + 2 = 5. His entire being, his very consciousness, was anchored to the glorious multi-hued truth of the pattern. "No," Kenji said, his voice dropping from ecstatic prophet to confused child. "No, you're not. You're not seeing it. The blue is the path." He grabbed Elias's head, trying to force him to look at the wall. "The purple is the foundation." "It's the song. You can't hear the song?" Elias firmly but gently removed Kenji's hands. "Son, I've been cleaning these floors for 40 years. I know a mess when I see one. And this," he gestured to the ink-covered walls, "is a mess. There's no song. There's just noise." "Noise?" Kenji repeated. The word struck him like a physical blow. In that instant, as Kenji's absolute certainty was fractured by this simple, colorless observation, something in the room shifted. Across the lab, Sarah, who had been meticulously weaving her web of Ethernet cables, suddenly stopped. Her hands froze. She looked down at the tangle of blue plastic in her lap as if it were a pile of snakes. "Where?" she murmured, her eyes wide with a sudden, lucid terror. "Mark, my head!" "My head is splitting," Kenji heard her. He saw the spell break. He looked at his own hands, the intricate black and blue lines that had been his new language. For a fraction of a second, the song in his head stuttered. The divine geometry dissolved. He wasn't holding the language of creation. He was looking at a hand covered in pen ink. The revelation was so profound, so agonizing that he cried out. "What did you do?" He screamed at Elias, his voice cracking. "You broke it. You broke the word. He's blind. He can't see. You're not supposed to be here." He was no longer speaking to Elias. He was shouting at the universe. On the other side of the glass, Nia Sharma watched, her mind racing, connecting the pieces. Kenji's words echoed in her earpiece. "Blue is the path. Purple is the foundation." It's not a picture. It's a blueprint. Elias's words like a circuit board somebody spilled. Kenji's new obsession. Building the pattern in 3 dimensions. "My God," Nia whispered, her eyes fixed on the chaotic sculpture in the center of the room. "It's not a language. It's instructions." It was a non-biological replicating code. A virus not for a cell but for a visual cortex. It didn't infect. It programmed. It found a complex, pattern-seeking intelligence, like Kenji's, and it used that intelligence as a tool to achieve its one singular purpose: to be built. To be copied. To move from a 2D image into a 3D physical form. Kenji wasn't building a temple. He was building the next stage of the pattern. A physical transmitter. The Odysseus 7 probe hadn't been sent a message. It had, as Nia realized with cold horror, simply activated a trap. It was a piece of cosmic code, dormant on Ananke for 1 billion years, waiting for an eye complex enough to see its layers. The probe's multispectral camera had been that eye. The signal wasn't an echo from Ananke. The echo was Kenji himself, and everyone else who had seen the image repeating the signal, compelled to give it form. In the lab, Kenji was in a frenzy. The pattern was fighting back, trying to re-establish its perfect, irresistible logic against the noise of Elias's disbelief. "It's not finished," he yelled, lunging toward his sculpture. He grabbed a keyboard, trying to place it on a higher point. "It must be finished!" "Elias, get out of there!" Nia shouted into the earpiece, but Elias didn't move. He just saw a very smart, very confused man having a breakdown. "Son," Elias said, his voice calm and firm, cutting through the scientist's panic. He put his hand on Kenji's shoulder. "It's just a pile of desks. It's just ink." "Look at it." Kenji stopped. He looked at the old janitor's impassive gray-seeing eyes. He looked at his own ink-stained hands. He looked at the divine structure, and the pattern broke. The song in his head did not fade. It shattered. The sense of purpose, the divine understanding, the blissful connection to the universe. It all vanished, leaving a cold, hollow silence. He wasn't a prophet. He was just a man, standing in a wrecked office covered in ink. Kenji Tanaka looked at the meaningless, tangled knot he had created, and he collapsed, weeping. The sound of Dr. Kenji Tanaka's weeping was a terrible human sound, in a room that had been a cathedral to an alien god. The spell was not just broken, it was shattered. As Kenji sobbed on the floor, his body shaking, Elias the janitor did the only thing that made sense to him. He walked to the first aid cabinet, retrieved a foil emergency blanket, and draped it over the scientist's ink-covered shoulders. He saw no prophet. He saw only a man who was very cold and very lost. The silence left by the pattern's retreat was a vacuum, and reality rushed in to fill it. In her corner of the lab, Sarah let the bundle of Ethernet cables fall from her hands. She looked at her raw, blistered fingers. "I think I missed my..." She paused, confused. "My daughter's pickup. What time is it?" She began to cry, not in ecstasy, but from a sudden, crushing migraine and a profound, inexplicable sense of loss. Mark was already slumped over his desk, unconscious, his body having finally surrendered to 48 hours of uninterrupted, obsessive activity. The glass wall between Nia and her team was no longer a quarantine barrier. It was just a window. Elias, his face grim, unlocked the main bulkhead from the inside. The contaminated air mixed with the normal air of the facility. Medics, finally called by Nia, rushed in. They saw a scene of exhaustion, a strange collective breakdown, but nothing more. They had no context for the ink, for the sculpture of chairs and monitors. Nia Sharma did not join them. She stayed in her office. The immediate crisis was over, but the war had just been revealed. She looked at the server blades on her desk. They were inert, just plastic and metal. But to her, they were a weapon of mass destruction. The image they held was a seed, a perfect predator, designed to turn the universe's most complex instruments, minds, into its own reproductive organs. It didn't destroy. It hijacked. Her mind raced. What if Kenji had finished the 3D model? Would it have broadcast the pattern, not as an image, but as a psychic signal? What if another agency, a military power, found this cognitive virus that could compel entire populations to build? What? There was no choice. Not really. Her fingers moved to her secure terminal. She was a scientist. Her entire life was dedicated to discovery, to knowing. And now she had to become the agent of erasure. Her first command was to the server stack. Initiate Purge 7B deep. It wasn't a simple delete. It was a military-grade wipe, overwriting every sector with random noise, then zeros, then random noise again. The pattern of Ananke dissolved into digital static, its perfect form erased from human memory. Her second command was harder. It was sent to the Deep Space Network. Root Odysseus 7. Command, scuttle, charge, execute. The command would travel for hours across hundreds of millions of miles. The probe, her agency's greatest triumph, would receive the order. It would ignite its own reserve fuel, not to explore but to die, turning itself into a small, silent fireball that would crash back onto the surface of the moon it had so briefly illuminated. Nia Sharma, director of Meridian Deep Space, had just destroyed the single greatest discovery in human history. The official report cited a catastrophic power surge from the probe, resulting in corrupted data and a brief localized electrical phenomenon in the lab that induced temporary mass hysteria. Kenji Tanaka was placed on indefinite medical leave, his mind fractured by stress. He spent his days in a quiet facility, not drawing. He could no longer stand to look at complex patterns, not carpets, not wood grain, not the leaves on a tree. They made him physically ill. He spent his time in a bare, white room filling notebooks, not with fractals, but with simple, empty squares. He was trying to draw the void, the only place the pattern could not follow. The facility was cleaned. Elias, the keeper, scrubbed the last ink stains from the walls. He was the only one who saw the truth and remained whole. His simple grayscale vision, a shield the cosmos could not pierce. Nia Sharma kept her job, but she no longer looked at the stars with wonder. She looked at them with the grim vigilance of a warden. The universe was silent again, but she knew, as she stared up at the tiny unseen point of Jupiter, that the pattern was not gone. It was just incomplete. It was patient, and it was waiting on that dark, distant moon, a perfect, silent trap, for the next pair of eyes to look just a little too closely. Thank you for listening to this story. These explorations into the unknown are only possible with your support. If you were captivated by the journey to Ananke, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support is the fuel that allows this channel to launch new missions, uncover new horrors, and tell the stories that are waiting for us in the dark. Thank you for being part of the crew.